Grace and peace. I'm Brian Musser, the Baptist Campus Minister at Drexel University, and this is Peace and Power Christian Fellowship, the peace of Jesus Christ to change our lives and the power of the Holy Spirit to change the world. We are starting a brand new series, The Reality of Worship, what we do when we worship God. And we are looking at the first lesson in this series. This lesson is Worship in the Big Picture, the role of worship in the life of a committed follower of Jesus Christ. This is the third part to that lesson, and we are looking at worshiping as a whole person. How does worship engage all of who we are? Earlier, we looked at the Great Commandment and how the Great Commandment is one of our ways here at Peace and Power Christian Fellowship that we talk about discipleship. We talk about loving the Lord our God with all of our heart, all of our mind, all of our soul, all of our strength, and our neighbors as ourselves. So we look at loving God in our choices, in our thoughts, in our feelings, in our actions, and in our relationships. And we can look at worship this way too. Worship, although it is around the soul, around the third part, around our feelings, how worship engages that. And if you have any questions about that, that is in the previous video. The previous part of this lesson is talking about how the worship specifically interacts with the soul, how we hold simple truths about God in our minds, and doing so changes how we feel, gives us hope, joy, peace, and other of those deep-rooted emotional connections with others and with God. But this video, we're going to look at how worship actually affects and is part of all of who we are. It is an entire whole person process. Worship involves all of who we are. The mind, it involves the mind because we must choose to worship God. Worshiping God is a choice of the heart. It is a commitment of the will. We can go through the actions and not worship God if we so choose. Worshiping God is intimately a heartfelt choice. We worship God with the mind because we must worship in truth. Our ideas, our images, our information, our intellect must be engaged around the truth of who God is and what God has done. And using our minds to hold those truths in our heads for an extended period of time is really the heart of worship. So worship is a choice to hold the truth about God in our minds and actually concentrate and think about that. Again, we worship with the soul. The soul is involved in our worship because it brings us a sense of peace, hope, joy, where we might have despair, chaos, anger, wrath instead. Worship engages our strength because we worship with our bodies and our offerings. We will sing with our voice. We will dance with our bodies. Often our offerings are sacrificing things we have produced with our physical labor, with what we do in the world, our actions. We bring some of the results of our actions, the produce of our actions before the Lord as an offering. We worship with our strength, with our bodies, with our actions. And worship engages our relationships. Often we worship together in a loving community. Quite often we talk about how we can't worship God if we are actively engaging our fellow men in justice, in corruption, in sin. Worship is a relational aspect. We relate to God. We relate to God's other creations as we worship. So worship in and of itself is a whole person sort of engaged idea of how we want to, as whole people, as united whole persons, engage in the worship of God. So that's the basic idea. Worship is part of all of us, how we do it, and part of not all of us, like each of us individually, but also part of all of who we are. All of us as each part of who we are engages God in worship. So some discussion questions. Would love to hear from you as you engage in this in the below. What is your favorite idea or image of God to use as you worship? In what ways are we encouraged to bring our physical bodies and actions into worship? Is it easier for you to worship in a crowd or alone? I would love to hear from you in those comments below. To engage in this conversation, I will respond appropriately. Hopefully this video has you thinking about what worship actually is and what we actually do when we worship God. So, as always, there are going to be multiple ways to join in this conversation. You can join in person, 5 p.m. in the JEMIC on campus, or Mondays via Zoom virtually at 7 p.m. That will all start on September 24th, Sunday, and then Monday, the 25th as well. And then there are these weekly kind of video lessons that happen probably about 3 times a week, and then blog site updates that kind of collate the videos as well. I'm all over the social media: Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, WordPress, YouTube. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow as appropriate. I enjoyed having this introductory conversation with you about the reality of worship. Hopefully it continues real soon.